Hey everybody, this is the House of Shade, and today's Community Spotlight is co-hosted by Red-Eyed Bear and Dougie DeLuca, who are joined by BrainJar of Composable Labs. Composable Labs is a research development incubation arm of Composable Finance. Labs functions as the interoperable research and cross-chain development hub for the Polkadot and broader DeFi ecosystem. In today's episode, we discussed UX optimization, the future of DeFi, and the importance of cross-chain infrastructure. Then we learn about Composable's utilization of IBC and Cosmosm, and how they view privacy in DeFi. And finally, we discussed how Shade and Silk could play a role in cross-chain DeFi. Now let's jump right in and join Red-Eyed Bear and Dougie DeLuca for our conversation with BrainJar of Composable Labs.
All right, and we're live. Thank you everybody for tuning into this episode. Honestly, it feels great to be back home recording podcasts again after spending a full week in Austin at DecentralCon and Consensus. To say the least, it was an absolutely packed week, full of learning, networking, collaborating, meeting new individuals, and just having some good old fun with the people I'm working with. Today, I am joined by Dougie and BrainJar from Composable Finance to talk to them about their cross-chain smart contract platform. Welcome, BrainJar.
Hello, sirs. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into the details about Composable Finance, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your background in the blockchain crypto space and what kind of led up to you working and building Composable Finance.
Yeah, sure. So actually, my first ever interaction with crypto was probably around 2014, 2015, something around then. Learned about Bitcoin, then learned about Ethereum, then learned about Cosmos and Polkadot, and then got really interested in like ETH2. Then the bear market hit, and I was heavily focused on basically just like surviving. And then as part of that survival, I started writing a lot of white papers for projects, sort of doing like deep protocol design, thinking about like what could DeFi look like on any of these chains in the future. Then sort of DeFi summer happened in 2020. Saw crazy gas prices, learned about Arbitrum and Optimism and all these other L2s popping up. Then I sort of saw Connects and some of these other solutions and felt like, well, IBC kind of does this already. Why do we need like 20 different bridging protocols? Then I sort of started to think about, okay, so now actually protocols are launching on these different ecosystems. Could there be a way where you could actually have cohesion between these disparate markets? And that's essentially what birthed Composable. A long time ago, the original ethos was how could we build a chain that can process multiple different smart contracts? But eventually I said, yeah, that's kind of boring. But the idea of sort of being able to segment state transition functions on multiple chains and have them be able to talk to each other through one sort of like overarching orchestration layer, funny enough, is like 1 year later, we've kind of returned to that vision. So yeah, that's kind of the idea.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, my crypto journey basically started like I feel like most people, I started in Ethereum and then moved to Cosmos after I started seeing, kind of like you said, these crazy gas prices and having to wait longer periods of time to be able to send transactions through, and just trying to find something that had more unique utility and was able to provide opportunities that some of these initial projects couldn't. So makes me happy hearing that you saw the value in the Cosmos ecosystem to begin with. All right, thank you for giving us some background on yourself and your time you've spent in the crypto industry. So maybe let's start off this conversation before we get too deep into the woods. about the tech stack that Composable is leveraging. Can you provide us like a general overview of what Composable Finance, like what problems Composable Finance is trying to solve, and some of the like intro things that people would need to know when learning about Composable?
Yeah, so the core problem that we're trying to solve is essentially it all tracks back to the user. So in like Web 2 land, there's this ethos of like, if this isn't stupidly simple for the user to interact with, no one's going to use it, and your project will basically just go to zero. And to be honest, that same ethos has really not trickled into crypto as much as we've wanted it to. And the reason, honestly, for that is because there's all these different chains, all these different ecosystems. For you to actually know, like even just today, I was like doing some stuff on Uniswap, and like for anyone to actually know what to do there, it's a huge learning curve. And like as much as people try to make these things simple, like for you to actually know what to do in DeFi, you have to first understand, which chain you want to be on. You need to understand the concept of gas. You need to understand the concept of like RPC URLs, which wallets you'd like to use, operational security, storing your private keys properly. And then from there, you have to then say, okay, now that I've selected my ecosystem to do XYZ thing, which protocol am I going to use? Will I use Compound? Will I use Aave? Will I use a lending protocol on Phantom? And so it's all these things that just like make crypto so difficult for retail to actually want to interact with. And just seeing in my experience, like showing some of my normie friends how to do stuff, like I just feel bad that this is like the best that our ecosystem can provide. So Composable's overarching vision is to tackle this bigger problem by just being able to create an orchestration layer where all of this complexity can be abstracted away. Obviously, this means we have to tackle like 7 or 8 different problems, but the first core problem we're tackling is how can you modularize functionality? And what that means is how can, if I want to swap something, not have to think about where I'm doing it, but rather specifying what you'd like to do as opposed to how you'd like to do it. So obviously we can dive deep into the tech stack and like how we actually do that, but like that's kind of the Valhalla vision of Composable, is like it becomes this framework and technical stack to build very stupid retail facing, all encompassing applications that not only are interesting from a retail perspective, but also interesting from a HFT and institutional perspective as well, because obviously you have these disparate markets and there's inefficiencies between the two. And that, of course, is hard to do if you don't have the infrastructure, hard to do arbitrage between these disparate markets if you don't have the necessary infrastructure, right? And so it's about bringing these two worlds together of like reducing inefficiencies and thereby begetting retail adoption.
I love the sound of that. This what you're saying makes me think about something you said in your presentation at Decentral that I really liked. You were talking about how you wanted to focus on letting users like do what they want to do versus how they want to do it. Like you're talking about abstracting away some of how these things actually happen. Which network are we going to choose? Which wallets are we going to choose? What bridges do we want to use if we're potentially, trying to move assets from one chain to another? And so from a enhancement perspective, or from the perspective of enhancing the end user experience, this makes complete sense. Like it clicks with my brain. But I'm curious, what what was it that made you realize that this was a problem? Like, there were so many people focusing on how something can be done and not enough people focusing on like making sure people can do what they want to do in the best way possible, regardless of kind of how it's done.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, this became most apparent to me when I was trying to LP on Sushi Swap when Sushi actually started going multi-chain, right? So you started seeing Sushi on Phantom, Sushi on whatever, Moon River, all these different places, and you start to realize, okay, the rates on these different ecosystems are super different. Not just because of the Sushi incentives, but also because there's like an actual difference in who wants to swap what for what in each ecosystem. So WBTC ETH would be at like some percent APY, and then you'd have like that times 2 on another chain, right? And so being the anal person that I am, as I was doing these things, I always was thinking, am I missing something? Am I missing an opportunity? Even just a swap, right? Like, yeah, you use 1inch on mainnet or Paraswap or any of these other DEX aggregators, but do you actually think you're getting the best rate? Where maybe you could be getting the best rate on Spooky Swap or something super, super random that you may have not thought about, right? So for me, I realized that this was just like missed opportunities is what motivated me to think about, okay, let's try to make this something that users can be sure that there's kind of no stone left unturned, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I guess we can start diving a little bit into the tech stack that you guys are leveraging to actually be able to enable users to focus on, what it is that they want to do rather than how they do it. So if I'm not mistaken, you guys are built on Polkadot, the Kusama parachain.
Yeah, both the Kusama and Polkadot parachain. Yep.
Okay, awesome. So most of our viewers and people that recognize Shade Protocol are from the Cosmos ecosystem. So could you provide a little bit of background on why you guys decided to build on Polkadot?
Absolutely. So what do you need if you're trying to? So the way I think about this is like, I don't know if you saw this slide in my presentation, but it's the best explanation of the technical stack. You have kind of like these 5 different layers, and it's very similar to like this OSI network model, which, by the way, like I wrote about this a long time ago, and then Layer 0 decided to just repurpose it in their article, but whatever. I'm not going to talk about that. So at the bottom of this, so at the top, you have sort of applications, then you have XCVM, then you have this routing layer, then you have the transport layer, then you have the infrastructure layer. So what does this all mean? So XCVM is basically the virtual machine that lets you execute cross-chain smart contracts written in CosmWasm. So then from there, when you specify in that cross-chain smart contract, say swap or lend, the function, aka where that actually happens, is determined by this routing layer. From there, the message is actually passed to the respective chain using IBC, basically, where IBC is possible, to basically, with instructions in this message to say, hey, swap X for X on this protocol, X for Y on this protocol. Then underpinning all of this, right? Like you can't just have all of this stuff without a reconciliation layer, because who do you trust? Who would you trust that these transactions have actually went through? Like you're going to trust the routing layer? Well, they need to put down a stake to do something. Mm-hmm. Are you going to trust relayers for IBC? I mean, yes, but like they're just passing messages, right? So how do you make sure that the stuff that you actually want to accomplish is provable and easily reconciled? And so we decided to create an L1 dedicated to sustaining all of this stuff happening across multiple chains and become the reconciliation layer. For us, then we had to decide: will we become a Cosmos SDK chain? Will we become a pair chain, or will we become like a roll up or something like that? And the decision was made to become a pair chain for three main reasons. Number one, we're Rust maxis, so we're not big fans of the Cosmos like SDK. I mean, yes, we are fans of it, but just like from a technical perspective, like what is best for our engineers is just Rust versus Go. So that was kind of like the first point. So then the focus was like, if we're going to be running this interoperable infrastructure, we need something that's agile and nimble enough to perform upgrades. And what's really exciting about Substrate is this concept of runtime upgrades. You can very easily just upgrade the chain's runtime in a matter of like minutes, as opposed to having to orchestrate, here's all the things that will be in this upgrade, let's all vote, and have the vote take forever, and then have this like arduous hard fork process. I mean, at this point, I think most people have reduced the time necessary for upgrades, but I do still fundamentally believe that the Substrate framework is a faster runtime upgrade experience than doing the same on Cosmos. And so that was also a consideration. And then the third consideration, honestly, was we weren't entirely sure how much stuff we would have to add to our chain to be able to support this stuff into the runtime. And I believe that the palette framework, aka modules in Cosmos, they're just a little bit more modular than modules in the Cosmos SDK. And I mean, that's, again, this is all subjective stuff, except for point two. I would say point two is probably like pretty fair. I'd say the last real point was also just like go-to-market strategy, right? I think a lot of Cosmos teams need to spend a lot of time spinning up a nice validator set and having a good group of people to validate the chain. Whereas for us, right, we get our security from the relay chain. So we didn't really have to do much to actually spin up our chain. There are obviously some drawbacks. We have to do a crowd loan. People don't like crowd loans in the Cosmos ecosystem. They say, oh yeah, you have to pay rent, etc. Well, I consider it the same way that Cosmos does airdrops, right? Every Cosmos project does an airdrop of a pretty substantial portion of its supply. Like we're talking like 16 to 20% of their supply, something usually. And that's exactly what we did for our crowd loan too. We just put out a rewards amount for people who stake DOT and KSM into our crowd loan slots. And I don't really see it much differently than that, to be honest. So with all those things being said, the mission was always, let's use the parachain as an infrastructure layer, but let's use IBC as the communication framework and COSM-WASM as the smart contract framework. So we're kind of borrowing from all the ecosystems and using what Polkadot does best, which is Substrate is the most bullish thing that I've ever seen as far as like creating blockchains, and shared security from the relay chain obviously has arrived faster than the Cosmos Hub providing shared security. We're looking into actually finding a way to get shared security as well from the Cosmos Hub, so we could have security from both. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how that's actually possible, but it sounds nice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that decision, like when you're saying you wanted to be, built on Polkadot, but then utilize a lot of the strengths that you see in the Cosmos ecosystem, I find really interesting. Could you talk us through a bit more like of that decision, like why you chose, to integrate IBC and ultimately kind of proliferate it? Like you're bringing it to Near, you're bringing it to other ecosystems. Like why choose IBC And also, why choose Cosmosm as well when you could have chosen seemingly other things as well?
Yeah, so let's talk about Cosmosm first. So first of all, Cosmosm is like the foremost WASM-based smart contract framework out there. There are other things like Ink in the Substrate ecosystem. Ink has been under development for 3 years now and still isn't ready, and has a lot of feel as though it's very architected so that it can't be deployed on multiple chains. Whereas Ethan Frey, outside of the Polkadot ecosystem, whereas Ethan Frey basically, it's called Cosmosm, but it feels like he built it in a way where it could be deployed on any chain. And he also recently put something out saying, we want to support more languages beyond Rust as well. So it's a much more it's a beautiful extendable framework that I think will become the future of smart contracting as opposed to EVM. I think EVM is really hyped because a lot of people do Solidity, but I mean, if people have the choice, I think they'll choose Cosmosm over Solidity, to be honest. Okay, so, and with regards to IBC, I think it was just obvious that, so we had to decide to do three things, right? Either one, we create our own message passing protocol like Axelar has done, which I don't believe in reinventing the wheel, especially because IBC has been under development for how long? Forever, right? 3 years at least.
Crypto years, yeah.
Yeah, in crypto years, exactly, right? So
yeah.
why would I then go say, yeah, I'm going to build my own messaging protocol? It's so it's going to be so much better than IBC and XCM. It's I'd rather leave it up to the gigabrains like Cosmos, right? Yeah. So that was kind of the first thing. So definitely threw that out of the window. Then we said, okay, are we going to extend to XCM or are we going to extend IBC? And let's just be real here, right? Which is in production for longer, which has had more volume, and which is heavily tested, IBC, which is extendable to other ecosystems, which is not chain specific, and which can also allow you to encode packets of information and pass it from chain to chain. The first 2 points is IBC, and the third point is both. But again, XCM is not very easily extendable to other ecosystems because it's heavily Polkadot focused. Yeah. Whereas IBC doesn't matter. As long as you can spin up a light client on both chains, you can use IBC to communicate.
Yeah. That's something I didn't know about until reading. I was reading through your some of the articles you posted on your Medium page and realizing that how IBC achieves its trustlessness through these light clients and finality proofs. And so, is it basically if there is a chain that utilizes light clients, you could effectively set up these, I think you refer to them as satellite contracts on different chains that can communicate to each other?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way that Trustless Bridging basically works is if a chain is well architected, let's just take Near or Polkadot as an example, to be able to pass the proof of a transaction actually occurring, you need a light client. And light client is basically consider it like a micro full node, if that makes any sense. So it maintains the state of the chain, but sort of like a subset, I guess. And because it maintains the subset, you can then take whatever this light client is reading, aka the latest finality proof, and pass it on to the next chain using IBC.
I'm trying to think as you're talking about this because I'm a non-technical person, but I enjoy listening to people talk about technical things. Sometimes it just takes me a little bit. longer to process that.
Yeah, I mean, I think right, like the beauty of this is let's just talk about 30 years from now, right? 30 years from now, are we going to be wanting to operate in a world where bridges go down? Like, what is a bridge? Okay, let's just really distill what's a bridge. A bridge is just something you can rely on to tell you that something on chain X propagates something on chain Y. Mm-hmm. Right? And instead of having to 30 years from now rely on a centralized party to tell you that this is the case, why don't you just have the actual proof basically get relayed from chain to chain? Why don't you actually have the actual, like, what's actually happening on the blockchain get relayed from chain to chain? I don't foresee a world in which things like validator-based bridges, and I don't see things like centralized bridges being something that exists 20 years from now. Maybe, right? I think there's going to emerge two like camps of bridging. There's going to be really well-funded bridges that have infinite money for insurance, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're running like a trusted bridge, because you know this bridge is going to bail you out, right? But as we've seen in this meltdown, even people we think that have billions of dollars are not necessarily don't necessarily have good balance sheets. Or then you're going to have the second camp, which, like, even at Osmocon, right? I said this, and I forget which of the other speakers replied to me, but he was like, yeah, bringing IBC to multiple ecosystems is really hard. It's like, yeah, bro, I know it's really hard. But like, what do we expect? Like, I'm envisioning a world 30 years from now, right? I'm not envisioning a world tomorrow. Like, yes, maybe IBC won't get as much traction as validator-based bridges today, right? But what about next year? What about the year after that? Like, IBC will become the HTTPS of blockchains. That's just the reality.
Wow. How many bridges do we have to watch fail or get exploited, or just like solutions just fail again before we realize that, okay, maybe this thing that hasn't gotten as much marketing or hasn't been, put out there by as much into the public, maybe we should follow its footsteps because it's got a proven track record of performance.
I mean, it's just not sexy, right? Like, I think it's sexy. I'll talk about it all.
I think it's sexy as well.
Yeah, I think it's sexy. I think it's super sexy. I'll talk about this all day long, right? But yeah, I think it's just like people may not necessarily care, but also, like, let's just not downplay how hard this is. Like, this is also very hard. Like, we have the people that we have working on this are probably some of the 0.00001% like brightest minds in not just crypto, but also like distributed computing and like cryptography and things like this. It's actually very, very difficult. And you guys see us like quickly putting out these near proposals and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, looks easy, but it's actually really, really hard. And like, these guys are just geniuses. That's why we can do this. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so going back to what you were saying about like how you view IBC, trustless bridging, basically as being the future, like my brain naturally shifts to Ethereum. And correct me if I'm wrong, you can't use the IBC type bridge to connect to Ethereum. And so how do you think Ethereum evolves to kind of, play a role in the future where it might be that IBC is the new HTTPS? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's two answers to this. Answer number one, ETH2 can support IBC bridging. I was talking to Jack about this.
Okay.
Yeah, I was talking to Jack about this. I think someone's already working on this, I'm pretty sure. But if they're not, then we'll probably work on it.
Yeah.
And then secondarily to that, Polygon can support IBC bridging. Cool. It's not like it's Ethereum mainnet, right? But at least like it gets you close, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Yeah, I gotta say, I totally empathize with your stance you're taking about like even if something is hard to build, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't build it or put effort towards that, especially if it's a superior end product. Most of my background and time spent in the crypto industry has been within the Secret Network, which is providing programmable privacy for smart contracts, and they were the world's first smart contract platform to be able to that's interoperable and be able to provide this programmable privacy. And you know that shit's hard, but that doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile endeavor. So it makes me very bullish to hear that you guys are more than happy to take on that sort of difficult these difficult tasks ahead of you.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to get spiritual with it, right? Like at some point you start to see, like, you start to just become so into this that it just becomes like you just have to get spiritual, like philosophical.
So I'm curious, with the approach you guys are trying to take in the DeFi space of being able to help end users just focus on, what that final task that they want to do, not how they do it. Do you feel like there are any risks that come from this abstraction for the end users? Like, even though it may be more difficult for users to do this end thing that they want to do, whether it's like for me, right? If I want to buy Secret, I'm usually going for buying Atom on a centralized exchange, bridging that or depositing that in my Kepler wallet, then putting that Atom on a DEX and then swapping for Secret, then pulling that back into my wallet. While that is a lot of steps, it does help me as an end user understand what this whole process is, kind of understand the role of centralized exchanges, even if I'm not a fan of them. I know they do play a role right now in this space. So I'm just wondering, one, if you guys think there are any risks associated from this, associated with the abstraction of like how things are done from the end user perspective. And then if you do think there are risks, how do you guys plan on educating end users who end up, or developers and end users on, what's going on underneath the hood at Composable?
Okay, this is a great question. So I think, first of all, it's all about UX, right? It's all about showing the user enough so that they don't feel like they're getting rugged, but also making sure that the abstraction isn't like kind of going too overboard. And so we're demoing an initial iteration of what we think these types of applications should look like. Like, I kid you not when I say Slenderman, our head of design within Composable, he has done nothing but think about this problem for the past 9 months.
That's awesome.
Basically. And me and him, I think our process within Composable is actually really different than a lot of other Web3 companies. Like, things always start between me and him, and then we get Carol involved, our CTO. Then we get Marmine involved, like our head of product strategy. And then we talk about all these different pieces. But when we're thinking about core user focused applications, I think it's super important. And I think it's also very underrated that people should have an in-house designer that they talk to, a product guy that they talk to give these ideas to. But anyway, we are going to open source a lot of different components of our UX for people to build these types of applications in the future, because we have spent so much time thinking about this. Example, I don't want to alpha leak too much, but basically we're going to have...
you could.
For instance, we have this concept of visualization of a route, right? I don't know if you've seen Socket Network. They have a nice route visualization of what happens when you move from chain A, B, C, whatever. We took that sort of general idea and just made it 10x more robust and encompassing of other functions like swap, lend, et cetera, et cetera. And so this all is visualized in a core open source piece we will ship. Basically what's called like a stepper or a visualizer. We don't have a name for it yet, but so there will be different pieces of this UX that we'll release, and we're going to demo this July 1st at Unchained.events at Berlin, our like first conference.
Awesome.
And we'll be showing people like, hey, look, this is what a cross-chain application would look like. And hopefully we can gather enough feedback from people where they say, yeah, no, like the UX is kind of went too overboard, or the UX didn't cover this piece and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be like, it's a UX problem, but also to your point, it's also a security problem too. So we're going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about, error handling, callbacks, what happens when a message at step 2 on chain A fails for some reason. Does it revert? Does it just move on to the next step? So these are all decisions we're going to have to make modular so that the user can kind of make this decision themselves eventually. So there's going to be a lot of education necessary. There's going to be a lot of like UX explanations and modals and things like that pop up to explain to people what's actually going on in the earlier iterations until we get to this like Valhalla moment. And then the last piece as part of this point addressing your question is, I think also there's going to be a massive lift for developers as well. Not from a technical perspective, rather from a mindset perspective. Because you think about it, right? Like, who wants to build these types of applications? Sure, you could have a token for these applications, but it's going to be people who actually understand what cross-chain means. I don't think people understand what cross-chain means right now. Like, you can think about what a cross-chain game looks like. You could think about what a cross-chain NFT marketplace looks like. These are things we'd be able to support, right? But it becomes harder to educate like the DeFi anons, who want to build crazy leverage perpetual arbitrage indices, across markets. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Actually, I have a few different questions based on what you're just talking about. But the first is kind of like going back to what you were saying about the developers. Like, what types of dApps do you see Composable being the home for? Like, will it be a lot of different aggregation-based dApps, or do you think it's something that, I'm not thinking about that you think is going to proliferate there?
Yeah, so there's 3 different categories. Aggregation, arbitrage, and basically kind of like, I call them like portals into crypto, kind of. Okay. We'll come to the third point last. Okay. The first point, aggregation, right? Things like how this application gets me the best interest rate across all loans. This application gets me the best swap across all chains. So there's aggregation, right? Also, I think within aggregation, we're going to see very interesting things, right? Like, have you ever seen a concentrated lending pool before?
No, but we need them very badly.
Hello?
I've never seen a concentrated lending pool.
Yeah, so I mean, think about it, right? Like UniV3, but for taking out a loan, right? Mm-hmm. What does that actually mean? Well, essentially, I mean, let's actually talk about what UniV3 actually is, right? UniV3 is essentially like virtualizing liquidity across a range. I mean, it's not actual virtual liquidity, but it's real liquidity across a specific range. You can do the same thing, but having it be virtualized. So you could take like VAMMs from perpetual protocol and adapt this for lending markets and just have essentially this like concentrated lending aggregator that pulls like essentially bids and asks for offers on loans from all these different like Aave, Compound, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be like very interesting, complex applications that can pop up. I don't know if you've seen this protocol called Panoptic, but Panoptic basically takes UniV3 LP positions and turns them into options, essentially. And so you could feasibly open a multi-legged option position across multiple different chains, one leg on one chain, another leg on another chain, etc. So that's this is gigabrain aggregation, new types of DeFi protocols. That's one category. Then we move to the second category.
Can I ask you a quick question before we move to the second one?
Yeah.
Do you feel like these aggregation focused DApps they're significant right now because we're seeing fragmented liquidity and siloed liquidity on these different chains? So obviously with what you guys are doing with this cross-chain smart contract platform, you're going to be able to have access to all these different fragmentations to build this kind of bigger collective. I don't know if you would consider it a virtual pool, but something like that. As we get to the point where liquidity is not as fragmented and there's these bigger pools sitting on these other chains, do you see these aggregation DApps kind of losing some steam, or do you think they'll be relevant for a while?
I mean, my opinion is that if anything, aggregation is more important in the bear market than the bull market, because who wants to LP right now? Nobody, right? Nobody. Who's gonna go LP WBTC ETH? I dare you.
No, I'm good.
Right. So it's okay, so if no one wants to LP, then how am I going to make my swaps, bro?
Fair enough.
So that's the thing. So I think no matter what, we're going to need a period of aggregation before there will be ecosystems. I think, for instance, right, Osmosis is a huge DEX, and Cosmos, will they always be the biggest DEX? I mean, I think I'm very bullish Cosmos, so I think that's definitely a very feasible situation. But what about other ecosystems, right? AVAX having the biggest pool for WBTC ETH, I can't see that, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be to your point, I think aggregation will be more valuable for blue chip assets, and thereby that's why it's important, I guess.
Fair enough.
So yeah, anyway, then about arbitrage, I think there's a lot of very interesting situations here that probably will go over the heads of a few people listening, but I'll try to break it down in very simple. So what is crypto? What is each chain? Each chain is a market, right? And as we were saying before, there's huge disparities between each market. Okay, so now what if you could spin up a contract that literally just performs kind of have you heard of CowSwap before?
I have not.
No.
CowSwap basically does coincidence of wants order matching. So basically they take your order and they match it with another person taking the other side of the trade on another within that same pool. Yeah. So that's super efficient, right? But what if you could do that across multiple chains, right? I take your order ETH BTC and I match you with someone selling BTC for ETH on AVAX, right? There's a spread there. And I think that's going to become very interesting for people like institutional players, etc. Then we talk about MEV, right? Cross-chain MEV. We're seeing the first examples of data being passed using IBC through interchain accounts. And I think what people don't really appreciate is if I run a relayer and I see something, for instance, let's just take Quicksilver as an example. If I want to provide a stake on another chain while I'm on Quicksilver, I don't think this is the perfect example, but that could be front run, right? Because as the relayer, I can see that, right? And relayers don't make money in IBC. I mean, there's new incentivization programs coming out, etc. But I don't think that that's going to be the long-term way that relayers get paid. I think relayers are going to make money on MEV, cross-chain MEV.
I was about to say, right now, I think most relayers are just relying on delegations. Like most of them also run validators, and they just promote the fact that they're a relayer and hope to get delegations that way.
Exactly, but they can start doing things like front running and stuff like this. They can start doing things like MEV, right? Imagine, for instance, in our system, imagine an instruction says swap on osmosis, right? And you're a relayer, you see that step 3 and you're the step 2 relayer. Then you could instantly go take the other side of that trade, right? And so this also becomes super interesting to people. And I don't think it's necessarily bad, right? Mm-hmm. As long as you're not harming the user, you're actually making the market more efficient.
Yep.
Yep. A most beautiful example of this, actually, I'm not going to leak that, so never mind. But I think this can be modularized and kind of like turned into something that institutions and others could be interested in doing. And I think cross-chain MEV is going to become a very big thing over the next like year. It's a meme right now, but I don't think it's a meme for much longer. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so for anyone that in the future wants to use applications that are built on or built within or on top of Composable Finance, what sort of wallets would they be looking at? Like, are you guys planning on being able to allow users to use a range of wallets? Is it going to be, Polkadot specific wallets? Are we going to be able to use like Kepler or more Cosmos ecosystem focused wallets?
Yeah, all three: Polkadot, JS, nice. Kepler, and MetaMask. Yeah, you actually, depending on what you want to do, you might not even need to connect your Polkadot JS. Down the line, initially you'll have to just assign some things, but down the line, you might not even need to even know that you're doing anything with regards to Polkadot at all. So yeah, that's like we've been playing around, and this is definitely a leak. We've been playing around for the past like 2 months, building like a widget that lets you basically connect all three at the same time. I mean, one after the other, but yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool. Yeah. So I actually, before I say this, I know you said there's one more product or one more DApp category, and it had a really cool name. I forget what it is. Do you want to explain what that is as well?
Yeah, this was the crypto portal thing, right? Yeah,
that's it.
I mean, so for this, right? It's just like, okay, let's think about Celsius, right? So Celsius took user funds and deployed it across all these different chains. We don't actually know what they were doing, really. And I think there will be a push, but it was a really great retail focused application, right? Like, I even know my parents even like aped into Celsius a long time ago, right? And like, so I think there will be a push for truly decentralized applications like Celsius that will emerge. And the only way you can build these things is with trustless bridging and with things like XCVM. There's simply no other way to do it, really. So I think these like user retail focused applications where you just set it and forget it, but want to have a history of what your money is actually going into and have it truly be decentralized, this is the third category.
Got it.
Gotcha.
Cool. Yeah, so I think I know the answer to this, but I could use some clarification. So, like, how does liquidity actually flow with Composable Finance? Like, does it ever actually have to go through the Picasso chain, or might it just be like, you're controlling on Picasso, but all the liquidity is actually moving separately?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, it's either or, right? So it depends on what you want to do. So if you want to say swap DOT for ETH, then you're going to have to obviously interact with our parachains.
Yep.
But if you say want to swap WBTC for ETH, then you never even need to interact with Picasso ever, right? That would happen on another chain. or other chains. So depending on how far we're going to go with this, which I think we're going to go very far, but it's going to be in phases. As I said, there will be a world where you don't even have to even know you're doing anything with Picasso.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So I do want to talk a little bit about how Shade Protocol can potentially work with, collaborate, or leverage what Composable is doing. So I'm assuming most people who are watching this are aware of what Shade Protocol is doing, but for any new people, let's say from the Polkadot ecosystem or some of these other ecosystems that are interested in Composable but not aware of what Shade Protocol is doing, Shade Protocol is an interconnected set of decentralized applications built on top of the secret network and leveraging the programmable privacy. The flagship product for Shade Protocol is Silk, which is an over-collateralized stablecoin that will be able to leverage that programmable privacy. And so I'm really interested because of these things that Composable is going to allow end users to do, all the different ecosystems and chains that are going to be able to be connected through these messaging and routing layers that Composable is building, going to be leveraging. I'm curious what potential opportunities are there. Like obviously with Silk, it is in our best interest, our being the protocol's best interest, to try and be able to promote and push Silk outside of the Shade ecosystem and outside the Secret Network ecosystem. That will soon be available after the next Secret Network upgrade. SNP20s will become IBC compatible, so we'll be able to start seeing SNP20s like Shade, Silk when it eventually comes out, Alter, all these other different SNP20s able to be seen and traded on other chains within the Cosmos ecosystem. So I'm interested to hear your perspective on how Composable can help Shade Protocol effectively help distribute Silk into other ecosystems and provide liquidity to other ecosystems.
Yes. I'll take this opportunity to leave and rejoin, actually.
Okay.
Proactivity.
Yeah. He already knows, got the timer.
Okay, so I think one of the biggest things that will happen soon will be privacy. Like, will be a huge narrative. I think it's already a huge narrative, to be honest, but it'll become even more and more important. I think when the dust settles, right, there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of changes from regulation. And I think people will start to want to be more, to feel like crypto isn't just the banking system, but like with some farm tokens, basically. So I think that's exactly where Shade Protocol plays into. And I think the biggest thing that I'd like to accomplish with Shade is this idea of like private bridging. So moving from one chain to the next completely in a private manner. So we have this protocol called Whirlpool Cash on our chain. It is a ZK circuit that basically lets you, perform private, essentially, private like transactions on Kusama. And what you could do is you could basically send funds into Whirlpool Cash, but then exit onto Secret Network through Centauri, aka our bridge to IBC enabled chains.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like my big vision is I'd like to be the first. I'd like for us to come together to become the first actual private bridge out there. There's obviously a conversation about ZK IBC. Like, how could you make IBC kind of like completely, no one knows what's happening, I guess. When I say no one, I mean relayers. but I think we're far away from that. People are looking into this, we're looking into this, but like I think this can be the first example of private bridging.
So just out of curiosity, this might be a figment of my imagination, but if you were to be able to do this in a ZK fashion, could you theoretically bridge from, let's say, Secret Network to Aztec and L2 on Ethereum in a completely private way without losing that privacy across any steps?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
We have to figure out, right, like how to actually do bridging between Aztec and IBC. So we have to figure that out. But once that's figured out, then yes, definitely.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy. Thinking about like full privacy bridging between EVM to IBC to Secret Network, especially, like the opportunities there, especially for Composable, have become pretty massive. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll say one thing that I've been thinking about as we've been talking about, these secure ways that Composable is going to be able to help enable this transferring of data and assets between all these other chains. One of the things that I've been kind of racking my brain with the past few weeks is like with Silk, obviously we want to be able to create a stable backing for Silk in an over collateralized model. And if we're holding volatile assets on our balance sheet, that is the backing of Silk, we effectively would either have to over collateralize our model even more, or have to have some sort of like more active hedging and like maintenance of the treasury than we might like. And one of the things I've been thinking about is, how do we back Silk with more stable assets, and a portion of those assets would be decentralized stablecoins. Obviously, within the Cosmos ecosystem, we have a limited selection of stablecoins to, back Silk with. I think right now there's IST that, it's not out yet, but that'll be out soon. There's eMoney and their Euro stablecoins. And then Comdex is also going to have a stable coin as well. But let's say Silk wanted to, or the Treasury wanted to hold, small portions of USDC, or they wanted to hold portions of Tether, or they wanted to hold portions of DAI or MIM. How do you think Composable can help make that a secure reality? Because obviously right now, if Silk wanted to back its stablecoin with something like USDC, we have to rely on some sort of bridge, like a trusted bridge. And if something happens to that bridge, then the backing of Silk is, automatically kind of under stress, so to speak.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And it touches on a lot of like fundamental points that we can get into. So first of all, it's like for Silk, you'll need a reconciliation framework probably. How can you prove that Silk actually owns these assets? So so what Silk could do is basically you spin up vaults on multiple chains, you own the assets on, say, Ethereum or Polygon or any of these other ecosystems, and then you just have an XCVM reconciliation contract that basically just allows you that essentially updates the treasury value every time more assets flow into those vaults. So that's essentially how you do it, and then you'd have this communication from the vault, via IBC to back to this XCVM contract and update the state that like, hey, now we have like, $100 more USDC in the treasury, as opposed to, unless you guys want to do a model where you have, all of these assets on the actual chain, on your actual chain, versus having these assets held in other ecosystems. I think the latter is more secure because you don't have to bridge these things over to your chain, because I think that's like, again, you have limited options. Gravity, I think Axelar, right? I'm not really sure who else. Nomad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I just kind of off the cuff agreement. It definitely sounds more secure. Like the protocol or the treasury would still own the assets on these other chains. They just wouldn't be held natively on the chain that Shade is deployed on.
yeah, exactly. That's
Okay.
right.
I gotta say, I personally, whenever I first found out about Composable, I immediately saw some really important similarities between Shade Protocol and Composable Finance. One of those is being trying to provide the best end user experience possible. DeFi and probably privacy DeFi even more is kind of intimidating for new users. Like I don't remember exactly how long it took for me to feel comfortable within DeFi doing all these different things, but I would probably say at least a few months before I really felt comfortable. And I know Shade is doing a lot of things to focus on optimizing the end user interface and experience. Focusing on providing all these access to all the different applications and DeFi primitives all within the same area. There's also the interconnectedness and capital efficiencies that come with having only a single application token, which is the Shade token. There's a lot of synergies, capital efficiencies unlocked by having all these applications connected and ultimately providing a better end user experience. You guys are taking a slightly different approach in how you're optimizing end user experience and focusing on abstracting away a lot of the complex things that are the barriers to entry into DeFi, kind of like what we talked about earlier, to make the process more approachable to new and veteran users alike. Like I've been pretty deep in crypto for about a year and a half, and I still do most of my crypto interactions within the Cosmos ecosystem because I'm not familiar with how other things work. Like I know I trust specific things within the Cosmos ecosystem. I've seen a proven track record. And for me, going out to other ecosystems, it's still slightly intimidating. I know what the learning curve was for Cosmos, so I can only expect it's going to be similar on these other chains. And so what Composable is doing is kind of just making that approach to all these different ecosystems, being able to provide exposure to all these different digital assets, just making it so much smoother from an end user experience. And I absolutely love the end goal you guys are focusing on.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think end of the day, it's all about the end user experience. If we don't have user experience optimized, we just simply won't have users, right?
Yep.
That's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, you can build. It's kind of slightly different approach, but like you can build these phenomenal products that the tech works really well, but it might be kind of clunky. Like the actual underlying operations and mechanics, they work, they're secure, but if that experience for end users is clunky or it's not intuitive, then your adoption is just going to be slower. And especially in a market like right now, where teams only have, or the runway for funding for teams is potentially limited, you want to help facilitate that adoption as quick as possible without, putting end users at risk, like a security risk.
Absolutely.
So for anyone that potentially wants to follow Composable or get involved with Composable, what links or resources would you recommend people check out?
Yeah, check out our Twitter. Yeah, so at Composable Fin, composable.finance, our website. Also, we will be shipping a new website pretty soon, so check that out when that comes out. Also, unchained.events are we have a very, very cool lineup, and actually Rob Habermeyer, founder of Polkadot, just confirmed yesterday that he's joining. So it'll be like literally people from the Cosmos ecosystem, Polkadot, Ethereum. Justin Drake, who's like the ETH2 lead at EF, is also joining. So yeah, it should be a very exciting lineup. And of course, we're releasing the demo of XCVM which should be huge. So that all happens July 1st in Berlin. If you're around, feel free to check that out. And then otherwise, feel free to follow me on Twitter, just at 0xbrainjar.
Sweet. Yeah, and I also am gonna link your Medium page in our description as well, because I learned so much from reading the articles that you posted.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, thank you for everyone tuning in. This has been a phenomenal conversation with BrainJar, talking about all the solutions that Composable Finance is bringing to the DeFi space. I'm at demo that comes out when you guys are at Berlin. And if there's any test nets that are going to be open and available, I am super interested in joining those to get first sneak peek at it. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a phenomenal conversation. And for everyone listening, make sure to check out the links that we provide in the description below. Make sure to follow House of Shade. Make sure to follow Composable Finance. And we will catch you guys next time. Peace.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. And thank you to BrainJar for joining us on the House of Shade Community Spotlight Series. Make sure to check out the links in the description below to learn more about Composable Finance and the innovative products they are building. And please help support the House of Shade in our mission by liking the video and hitting that subscribe button. Thanks, and see you all next time.